So I.
I'm in the waiting room.
So that's. Yeah. That's because sometimes I get sensitive. In my mind, sometimes you're gonna go there and.
This was the only way.
On the heavy side,
Yeah, on structure.
well,
It was a separate item from the committee. We can do it this week.
that's a tough. Yeah, it's tough to go on it. On the automotive stuff.
Great, thank you, everybody. We will call this regular board meeting back to order, and we're at the consent agenda number 4. Can I have someone move the consent agenda? Moved by Director Rainbow. Seconded by Director Herford. Amendments? Full.
I would like to pull 4.1.5.
Okay, we'll pull 4.1.5 for review at section 5. Thank you. And with that amendment, could I have some, or I will call the question, all in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Correspondence for action. Shall we proclaim Rail Safety Week? It's still part of the consent. Let's go to business arising from minutes. 4.1.5, Director Rainbow.
Oh, is that what it is?
Yeah.
For the minutes, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get myself together. I thought I had another couple of minutes. So we had a meeting of the Policy Development Review Committee, and a resolution in that meeting was to engage the services of Tracy Lawrenson as a consultant, and Greg's gone ahead and board policy has offered her that position. She's accepted. So where we're at the moment is that Tracy is working on a survey that she intends to put out to the whole board. Craig and she and I had a virtual, what do you call it, a Zoomy type meeting yesterday, and talked about some of the things that the committee had brought up, some extra things that Craig has suggested, some things that I was talking about yesterday. And so once she has that that survey formalized, she'll be sending that out, and it'll be sooner rather than later. Let's put it that way. At one point, she wanted to do it by the end of this week, but I think it'll be a little longer than that. But when you get that survey, I encourage you please to complete it and get it back into her as soon as possible, and that will enable the committee to move forward with this work. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anybody if there's any questions?
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
So with that, can I have someone move receipt of that
I'll move that.
minutes?
I'll second.
Moved by Director Rainbow, seconded by Director Herford. Comments? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. That completes number 5. We're on 6.1, recommendations of July 12th area directors meeting. And we're at 6.1.1. A request for decision regarding the Canada Community Building Fund. Projects that funding up to $40,000 be allocated to Pemberton North Water System Service from Area C Community Works Fund towards cost of 2 water meter replacements. Would you like to move that, Director Mack?
Yes.
Seconded by Director Richmond. Comments? All in favor? Any opposed, motion carries. A request for funding from the Pemberton Young Life Program, that $3,500. Yeah. Did you do this? I did, yeah, I did. Thank you. I only read the first one though. I meant to say the second one. Friendly amendment, we're all good. Go ahead.
Are we gonna do the Darcy water system one?
Yeah, so let's do that separately.
Okay,
The funding of $18,000 be allocated to Darcy Water System from Area C Works Fund. Moved by Director Mack, seconded by Director Stoner. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Read the agenda. Okay, that $3,500 be granted to Young Life Pemberton Committee from Electoral Area C Amenity Fund towards youth programming costs in the Pemberton area. Moved by Director Mack, seconded by Director Richmond. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Pemberton Wildlife Association shooting range property tax exemption. I thought you were putting your hand up there, Viv. You moving that, Director Richmond, seconded by Director Mack. Comments? All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. And a director's report on the Sea to Sky Hospice Society totem pole from Director Rainbow. Do you want to speak to that briefly?
Okay. No, Russell and I, a couple of years ago, jointly funded the garden at the back of the hospice, and then subsequent to that, funded the gazebo that was added to that garden. And so when this idea came from the art committee of the Hospice Society to have a totem pole, the concern was to have some things, visible things that were First Nations, because we get First Nations patients, don't we? So the idea of this pole came up. The person I'd like to comment on this. The person that is going to be carving it is Art Harry, who is the carver that did the pole outside the new Foundry Youth Centre building. And Jeanette Nathan and I had a chat about it because she was just a little concerned that to make sure that we went through the protocols with the Squamish Nation. And so Art, I've spoken to him, and he's talking to the elders. He's going to have they promised him a letter of support. So we'll be getting a letter from the Squamish Nation supporting what we're doing there. Art has his log. It's a 16 feet long log, and I was expecting it was going to look a bit like a telegraph pole. But it's not. It's about that round. It's a very huge log. So he's preparing it right now, and we're going to have a blessing ceremony. And once I've got a date specified for that. I'll send you a note, because anybody from council is interested. We'll invite a number of people to come to that. And then once the pole is ready to be erected, again, we'll choose a date to do that and to have representatives there for that as well. Meanwhile, we're in touch with the Lillooet, because there are people that come down to the hospice from the Mount Currie area. We want to have some kind of visual art from the Lillooet Nation as well. We're not going to ask for another totem pole, because I don't believe that they do poles. I may be wrong there, but they do. No, they don't. No. But I'm sure we've already got one piece of art on the wall that is by a Lillooet artist. We're hoping that we can get some more stuff from them. And again, on Jeanette's advice, we're treading carefully with that and making sure that the Squamish people are happy with Lillooet Nation having that kind of representation at the hospice. Art doesn't seem to think there'll be any problem, but we will make sure that we sort of cross the T's and dot the I's. So with that,
Director Rainbow.
what did I forget? Let's just get into that. Shouldn't I have said all that?
You can see what you said.
Oh, okay, but I was gonna get to that. Yeah, yeah. I hadn't forgotten. So, thank you for allowing me to give you that sort of background to this item. When it was passed at EAD, I declared a conflict because I sit on the hospice art committee, and that's where this request came from. So I'm going to excuse myself.
On the grounds of perceived bias.
A perceived conflict. Or,
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I will move this.
Okay. Director Stoner, comments? Go ahead.
I'm supportive of this, just one thing, and maybe I'll follow up later, but my understanding is that totem pole specifically is a Haida Nation only thing, and Squamish Nation does welcome poles or poles.
Yeah.
And so it just may be worthwhile for us to clarify. I tried to look the Squamish chief recently as he used totem pole and so on, so it's hard to know, but I think it might be a bit of a misnomer.
Agreed. Yeah, thank you for that clarity, and I think we need to look into that before any kind of welcome. Obviously, we want to take direction from the nation from which it's coming. Anyone else?
Yeah, question to Director Rainbow. Are you talking to the council of the Squamish Nation, or is the letter coming from local elders? Or do you know?
Director Crompton, Director Rainbow has recused himself from the remainder of this discussion due to having a conflict in this area. So he can't respond to your question at this time.
All good, thanks.
Thank you. With that, I see no other questions or comments. I will call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries.
Vivian's trying to get your attention, Jim.
Go ahead, Vivian.
Thanks. I'm just having my screen freeze up a little bit. So if I turn off my video, I'm still here. I'll text Angela if I actually have to leave the meeting, but I am, it just a few times was freezing, glimmers of wonderful internet here. Jen, for us on, I'm not putting my hand up to vote aye. By the time I get it up there, we're already moved on to nays. So can we just go back to just looking for opposed? Maybe?
Yep, that's fine.
Thank you.
You got it. Okay, sorry, I'm bringing my square back online. That's why I'm taking a minute here. All right, let's move along in the agenda to 6.1.5. This is a request for funding for Pemberton Meadows Fire Association. Oh, geez, this is going to do weird. Likes to kick me out after lunch. All right, everyone good? Great. Okay, 6.1.5 is a request for funding for the Pemberton Meadows Fire Association water tanker truck. That funding of $20,000 equal to 25% of the cost from Area C amenities funds be granted to the association towards the cost of purchasing. To the following requirements: that the association providing proof to the satisfaction of the financial officer of receipt of matching funds and grant program equal to 50% of the purchase price of the used water tanker truck. And should I add that as well at the same time? And the second, that for clarity, the SLRD funding noted in the previous resolution is not available to be released to the association until January 1st, 2024 at the earliest. And that has to do with budget constraints. So, sorry that second part is not included in the printed agenda. If I'm happy to answer any questions anyone may have.
I'll move this.
Okay, so the seconder. Any questions or comments? Okay, I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. All right.
Oh, excuse
Go
me.
ahead. Yeah.
Could a letter or email be sent to Kim Marshall today as this request? I guess their application has to be in by August the 3rd.
Okay.
So they just needed confirmation that this was approved as is.
Okay.
So
So
if we could do-
resolution to communicate this.
Send
to the
communication
association.
today.
Yep. Moved by Director Mack, seconded by
Yeah,
Director
thank you
Rainbow.
very much.
Comments? Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, 6.2.1, recreation service report from the SLRD Pemberton and District Recreation Services Fees and Charges bylaw. That the bylaw cited be introduced and read a first and second and third time, and these are only to be voted on by C and P. Great. So you guys, who wants to move it? Moved by Director Mack, seconded by Director Richmond. Any of the two of you opposed? Motion carried. And then that the same bylaw be read, be adopted. Moved by Director Mack, seconded by Director Richmond. Either opposed, motion carries. Thank you. And let's full block it just then. We do this every time. We have this conversation every time. All right. Could we, the
6.2.2.
first and the second, they can be done together, moved by Director Richmond, seconded by Director Mack. Any opposed? Motion carries. And 6.2.3, Oregon and District Initiative Fund Policy Amendments. Moved by Director Richmond, seconded by Director Mack. Either. This is everybody. Everyone gets to vote.
Oh, we can do it.
We do.
Wake up.
That's not what it says in the second.
It says rated.
On 6.2.3,
Yeah, maybe the first one was the policy we approved with on the
which was second, yeah.
And then, okay, so it's just the first, that. Any opposed? Motion carries. Next, that was only for Mac and Richmond, $5,000 towards the arts and culture recreation stream. Moved by Director Richmond, seconded by Director Mack. Either opposed, motion carries. And that $5,000 from the ECDEV stream be allocated to cover operational costs. Moved by Director Richmond, seconded by Director Mack. Either opposed, motion carries. Right. 7.1, bring in. Okay.
Am I on?
Okay. We are at 7.1. This is a request for a decision on the Tiger Bay Development Corporation OCP zoning amendment application bylaws for the over to you, Director.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Kim Needham, Director of Planning and Development Services here at the SLRD. I am going to go through a presentation on the Tiger Bay Development Corporation's application for OCP and zoning amendment. So next slide, please. Okay, so the purpose of this presentation is to provide the board with additional information based on its resolution request of June 28th. A number of comments were raised at that meeting. And so I'm hoping that I can answer them. Secondly, the purpose of this report is to consider second reading of the OCP and rezoning amendment bylaws and to refer the bylaws to a public hearing. So a little background, next slide, please. On June 28th, the board considered second reading of the OCP and zoning amendment bylaws. The board raised a number of questions at that time and requested additional information. They deferred consideration of second reading pending further information. So since that meeting, staff have been in talks with Tiger Bay and have been looking to prepare responses for this. There is a table of responses in the staff report, and there's also additional detail that has been provided by the proponents that is attached to that report. Next slide, please. So the board had a long list of items that were noted in the resolution. So you can see those here. I'm not going to run through them, but I will run through each of these just to give you further information on each one. So starting with phasing of recreational amenities. There had been a comment raised about the timing of amenities and the option to advance some amenities and the provision of those to an earlier phase of the project. So the amenity package has been negotiated with the board, with the board's input. There was a term sheet provided, and the idea was to maximize the benefits to the community and balance the timing and delivery of the project benefits with the economic viability of the project. So the community center is proposed to be in phase 4. And this was really done in order to allow time for the school district to decide on whether it wants to co-locate its facilities, if it even wants a school in that location, and also to enable a tax base that would be sufficient to offset the SLRD's operating costs. So the SLRD is meant to be the primary operator of that community center. So there does need to be people living there and money coming through in order to service that. The development agreement does allow, though, for the SLRD to move that up. And what we would do would be take securities to cover the construction. So if we don't feel like phase 4 is the right time and we want to do it earlier, we can get the money and we can have it done. So that is a possibility that we can trigger at any time based on the development covenant. Now, with respect to affordable housing, there are a few issues raised about that, particularly the phasing of the affordable housing, the quantity and the form of the affordable housing. So there's a long-standing commitment that was in response to the board request to add additional units. So there are 150 non-market rental units that are the developer is obligated to provide. And so this would be dealt with through a housing agreement, and that's a bylaw. And that would be required for us to provide before the first residential unit is built in phase 2. So there will be a more focused discussion at that time, once we have more information on community needs, etc. And the board will have complete control over the phasing, quantity, and form of affordable housing through that agreement. And I just wanted to add as well, some of you may recall that we recently updated all of our OCPs to create development permit guidelines around affordable housing. So in each OCP, there are guidelines for unit composition, unit size, etc. So essentially, we're looking at 30% one bedrooms, 30 to 40% two bedrooms, and 20 to 30% three bedrooms. And that, of course, was done to prevent developers from going in and just building all studios and one bedrooms and the cheapest, smallest units they could do. So we do have an extra layer of protection through our area DOCP guidelines. So those will help also to guide the housing agreement. In addition, we will likely have updated our housing need and demand study by the time we get to this point. So we'll also know more information from that as to what is required. Next 2 slides, please. We'll move it up to options for workforce accommodation. Okay, so there was a suggestion that on-site workforce accommodation should be considered now to avoid future approval requirements. And so in discussions with Tiger Bay, they don't know who the future contractor is going to be. They don't know when they're going to even start construction. And so they would prefer not to address this matter now. Instead, they would seek a temporary use permit in the event that they did want to have temporary workforce accommodation located on the site. And again, that would be a board decision. They would have full control over approval of that TUP and all of the terms associated with that TUP. Next slide, please. Transit. So there was a question about transit provision and funding. So the development agreement secures both local and regional transit infrastructure. And the development agreement also requires Tiger Bay to petition for local improvement area bylaws for ongoing funding of services. That's section 3.4. Transit funding could be included in that bylaw or a similar bylaw. And Tiger Bay has stated that they support bylaws that levy future residents to fund local and regional transit, preferably on an area-wide basis. We don't anticipate anyone living in this community for at least another 5 years. And at that, prior to that, this could be sorted out. They have provided transit infrastructure, and as part of the development agreement, they would have to further identify all of the transit stops at each phase. But generally speaking, the overall site plan does accommodate transit stops throughout the community. And just as a reminder, there actually is no transit there now. So, but in the case that there is either regional transit or an extension of Squamish transit system to the area in the future, the community will be designed to accommodate that. Next slide, please. Quantity and quality of the water system. So there was some discussion about water system capacity and reverse osmosis issues. This has been thoroughly looked at by both the SLRD staff consultants and the developers consultants. And that's really what has created the delay in coming back for second reading. We have been really working through this issue. Tiger Bay's engineers and SLRD consultants have reviewed this issue in respect to the Vancouver Coastal Health Letter. There is a very minor risk of future saltwater intrusion after very extended periods of drought. Just to speak to that a little further, the concern over saltwater intrusion would require a 155-day drought. The developer has agreed to an extensive monitoring program as a caution. That's set out in development agreement section 3.2F. Phase 3 and 4 would require detailed water supply studies. And section 3.5D, the owner has to undertake a saltwater intrusion model. This water treatment plant will be designed with saltwater treatment, which would be a pump and filter that's set out in development agreement 4.2H1. If the data and the study identify a possible need for treatment, the system will be installed in phase 4. That's set out in the development agreement as well. Just to note, at peak use, the Surf Park would use approximately 4.5% of available water in an August time period. Vancouver Coastal Health, Ministry of Environment, and the SLRD have additional approvals over water before the system is approved and development can proceed. Next slide, please. There was a question about wastewater treatment plant status. So the current plant is compliant with the 2007 permit. It was built to accommodate South Britannia. We underbuilt North Britannia by about 700 to 800 units from what the OCP required, because they mostly went with single family as opposed to multifamily. So there were fewer units. So the current plant is running under capacity by a long shot. So there was a question about whether this was secondary or tertiary. We looked into it with the engineers. Those terms aren't really used any longer. However, if this project requires upgrades to the current plant, which would be the installation of new cells, that is covered off on the development agreement, and it would be fully subject to provincial approvals. Next slide, please. There was discussion over the ensuring delivery of future amenities, and there was some concern that the obligations that the development has agreed to would be able to somehow get by without any security. So every offsite improvement and amenity obligation is secured through the development agreement. Building permits will not be issued in any phase until the obligations are provided or secured through future servicing agreements, including the posting of securities, and that's required by our servicing bylaw. So these agreements will require a cash bonding to secure the works and services in the development agreement. So next slide, please. There was discussion of potential impacts on District of Squamish amenities and how to offset that perceived impact. So there is currently a bylaw. That bylaw is 438/569. And what that bylaw does is it collects requisition taxation from properties in South Britannia and all of Howe Sound. It's estimated that once this project is complete, there will be roughly $100,000 in contributions every year to the Brennan Park pool. There is also the thought that this project will probably provide other benefits to the District of Squamish, such as additional support for local businesses. It's a policy and financial transfer matter that may be addressed at a policy level if the board wants amenity users from the SLRD to pay further monies to municipalities. Next slide, please. The phasing of the CN Rail overpass, that was an issue that was raised. There was some concern that the Manatee Bay Park could be created without appropriate access. So the development agreement does address access in 2 stages. So before the park is dedicated, a crossing agreement and all statutory rights of way must be in place for a public level crossing. And the ultimate CN bridge is scheduled for phase 3. There is no scenario where the park could be created without a public access. Next slide, please. Condition of the Manatee Bay Park land. So Manatee Bay has always sort of been seen as the jewel in the crown of park spaces for the SLRD in Howe Sound. It's been something that the SLRD has wanted for a very long time, and it's been embedded in OCPs as long as I've been here, that we want to acquire that land as park. And if anyone's ever been there, I think many board members have, you'll know why. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. So stage 1 and stage 2 environmental studies have been completed in support of the contaminated sites profile. The contaminated sites profile is a submission to the province. No contamination was identified at the Manatee Bay lands. And I wonder if perhaps the person who raised this issue may have been confusing this site with Britannia Beach North, which was a site that had extensive mining and was contaminated. This site was not contaminated. There was a previous gravel pit above Manatee Bay, but no contamination has been associated with this site. And there has been significant rehabilitation on the lands to the north where there was contamination. Next slide, please. Okay, so the recommendations that have been included in the report are that second reading of the bylaws be given and that they be referred to public hearing. That the development agreement be finalized and ready to register on title as a condition of adoption of the bylaws, and that Tiger Bay make an initial contribution of $480,600 for fire services as a condition of the adoption of the bylaws. And I will add that in the development agreement, you'll note that there are a bunch of triggers based on units developed. So for every 100 units, there's $128,400 contribution required. So before they can go on to the next 100 units, they have to pay that in today's money. And we've designed the development agreement to keep up with the construction CPI. So as inflation increases, this rate will be increased. But in today's dollars, the contributions for the ongoing maintenance of the house on fire system is $1,155,600. And that's in addition to this $480,600 contribution. And that is it for my presentation. If anyone has any questions, I would be happy to help. And I'm pinch hitting today for Mr. Eric Vance, who is away on vacation. So I apologize if I don't know everything, because he's the one who's been really immersed in this project from day 1.
Quite all right. You've done a wonderful job so far. Questions from anyone?
I want to move those first 2 that's.
I'd like to get to questions first. Director Richmond and then.
Give an answer.
Well, not until my satisfaction yet, so I'd like to have some conversation. So my questions are, so a couple of them. First of all, with regards to the phasing, if something's in phase 4, everything in phase being provided in phase 4, everything that's been built up till phase 4, so up to and including phase 3, can be occupied at that point.
Provided it's got final building permits.
Yeah.
Yes.
And okay, so the provision of those amenities will happen after people have already moved into phase 3. If other things have been, if something is identified as being provided in phase 4, people can move in completely phase 3 before the provision of those amenities is done.
Yes.
Okay.
It'll be phased.
Okay, so follow-up question, do we have any best sense of how many people will be living there at completion of phase 3?
Well, there are, 1,050 units. Most of the residential units would be there prior to phase 4. So, 2,800 people perhaps.
So the majority of the residents in this new community will have moved in before the beginning of construction on, say, the recreation facility, potentially.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I guess with that similar phasing in mind, I'm wondering about the provision of housing, affordable housing units, recognizing that things will evolve and change, and like you said, our housing assessment, needs assessment will be updated at that point. So recognizing some things will be changed. Does staff not feel that we can have a sense of sort of a minimum or a starting point of some of the affordable housing so that they can get constructed more through phase 2 and phase 3? As opposed to waiting at that point. I know I'm just trying to wrap my head around what we're, the comment is we'll have more information as to what's needed for affordable housing here. I'm trying to wrap my head around what the entirety of that information is and whether some of that affordable housing can be provided in earlier phases.
Yes, thank you. So the housing agreement is required before the first residential unit in phase 2. The housing agreement can also require that the housing be delivered in phase 2. But that will be up to the board at the time when we bring that housing agreement to them.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you. And my last question, if I may, is just around the comments around the workforce housing. That contracts haven't been awarded, we don't know, there's still a lot that isn't known. Is it safe to say that we do know that a lot of people will probably need to live on site to work there, or are we trying to put all the construction workers on the highway to build this development?
I mean, I think the developer at this point doesn't know who the contractor might be. Maybe it's a local contractor, but I think like the bulk of construction isn't going to happen for a few years. And so I think there are some unknowns. I know with Britannia North, they had some local workers and a lot of them were being bussed up from Vancouver. I'm not sure who will get the contract for the bulk of construction, and it may be a number of contractors.
Safe to say, would it be safe to say that as there is no real housing, very little housing in that area, that the majority of the people that will be working on this project will be coming from away, whether it be at Squamish or Vancouver or somewhere else? Or do we anticipate, I mean, there's not the workforce in that area. So is it safe to say that the majority of the workforce will be coming on the highway, either north or south?
Yeah, I mean, I know that with Britannia North right now, there are some construction workers that actually live at Britannia Beach. But I mean, Britannia Beach is a small community. So yeah, most people will be coming from outside Britannia Beach.
Thank you. That's all for questions.
Thank you. Mr. Donor?
Thank you. Through the chair, I'm just wondering if staff can remind me what is currently allowed to be built on the site without the rezoning?
The OCP accommodates the number of units that are being proposed. So the OCP has always envisioned roughly 1,000 units at Britannia North and roughly 1,000 units at Britannia South. The current zoning is an RM zoning, so it allows, I think, for a single family house and resource uses, forestry, gravel extraction, etc.
So in short, it's a pretty substantial land lift that we're providing through the rezoning, despite it being recognized in the OCP that that's the long-term vision. The actual, if you do a pro forma on this, the land lift that we're providing is substantive to the developer.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm curious about what happens then if a portion or if the site is sold.
The development agreement and the zoning obviously runs with the land.
So although we may have commitments from the individual developer who's currently at the table, the land is actually currently for sale. So we have limited, despite what's in the development agreement, we have limited ability to actually secure the contextual agreements that we've heard from the developer?
The land is not for sale. There is a parcel for sale that is south of this piece, and I was even confused by that. I thought that perhaps it was for sale, but it's an adjacent parcel. The development agreement would be on the title. And so anybody who purchased this property would inherit the development agreement. And if parcels are subdivided from within the development, there is a provision in the development agreement that the developer has to sell the land with the obligations as well. Okay, so nobody can get out of the obligations, in other words.
And then going to the affordable housing piece. So if I think back to conversations that we had a few years ago when this was at committee of the whole, we had extensive discussions around the affordable housing units and how those were likely separate from employee housing. But we've gotten to a point now, and I actually don't see any employee housing in the proposal that's on the table. I see affordable housing units. I see some language that they might be considered employee housing, a portion of those affordable housing units, but they are not two distinct things, despite what we had previously discussed at this board table. And so I'm just curious, has a workforce plan been completed? And is there an understanding of how much employee housing will be necessary in addition to the affordable housing?
So previously, there were 100 units being proposed, and then 50 were employee. And at the board's request, when we dealt with the term sheet, which was basically an agreement of what we were going to bring forward again, the board had asked that all 150 units be made non-market affordable housing. So we have proceeded on that basis.
And then can you remind me how much cash in lieu of critical amenities the developer is putting forward for a policy?
Cash in lieu?
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure what you're referring to.
So in our community amenity contribution policy, it says applicants for rezoning are encouraged to consider contributions in line with these set out below, and it's a $1 figure per square meter of additional new build.
The amenity package, the amenity policy, I should say, it's a voluntary guidance document. All amenities are voluntary. And so the package that you see today with the 460,000 for the fire department and the 1.1 million for ongoing at the fire department and the park and the trails, etc., forms the voluntary amenity package that's being proposed by the developer.
Thank you. Director Herford, and then I have Director Rich Jones on the screen.
Yeah, thank you. On the workforce accommodation during construction and this concept of the affordable units and the workforce, is there a differentiation somewhere in what's proposed to ensure that those non-market units get used for the non-market needs of the area versus the housing the construction force during? I'm trying to understand them as an amenity that's provided versus something that's needed for construction, and like when does this actually net out to positive community impact?
That will be determined by the housing agreement that is yet to come. And so that can specify perhaps that certain units may be, as we did for Furry Creek, we set aside units for essential workers like firefighters and early childhood educators because there's a daycare. And so something similar can be done here once we sort of look more closely at the details of a housing agreement.
Thank you. And during the construction phase, when we're having a challenge in Squamish with a major project, and everyone's heard about this, I'm sure, around the workforce accommodation. So for me, it's not necessarily that we're prescribing that happens, but I want to make sure that it's as easy as possible, because the TUP is another process. And if there's anything that we can put in now that facilitates that happening, I'm happy to do that, but it's not about being prescriptive. My intent with this isn't about being prescriptive in how that happens. Is how can we facilitate that so that there's not that knock-on effect, both in Britannia more generally or the adjacent communities. Just I wanted to get that out there. The mix of those units is based on the policy at what point in time? Because this is something that can evolve to reflect the housing needs assessments that are going to be coming, or we don't lock into that. That's a future piece that will align with whatever the policy of the day is around the split. Is that, just want to make sure that's what I'm hearing?
Yeah, it's a flexible approach. So the housing agreement will basically look at the needs of the day and the projected needs.
Okay. And on the water piece, sorry, I'm just kind of going through my list. On the water piece, it had the term was funded in the same manner. So if additional equipment was needed, it'd be funded in the same manner. And I just wondered, I don't have a concept of pricing or how specialized this equipment is, and if that's viewed as sustainable funding to accomplish that with the service, with the area that would be paying for it. It's not a major, it's not 10 times more expensive to do it. It's going to be an extreme burden for the folks that live there to accomplish this water treatment that may be needed. I get that it's not necessary, but
I'm going to turn to not you, Cameron, to Omar.
Well, I mean, with the reverse osmosis, we don't know enough either. We don't know areas that are using that system. But as in the development agreement, the developer pays for building this system. It's just the operations would be taken over by SLRD.
yeah, and that's the risk part I was trying to feel comfortable with, and I don't know what that is, but
And that's, I mean,
where do we capture that so to minimize the risk to the SLRD more broadly and I suppose the folks in the service area, future residents in the service area.
so I mean, through the approval for this system, I mean, we're obviously in an early stage. That would all go through SLRD staff again and Vancouver Coastal Health. So if there was any concerns at that time when they're designing it or building it or the detailed design, those can be kind of gone through at that time. So I think we're definitely in an early stage to discuss those measures.
Okay, you know what? Yeah, I understand the detailed design would come later. I'm just want to make sure that we've got, with the housing, affordable housing piece, we do have the housing agreements as that backstop, and that's where we'll capture that future work and understand the system needs a design too. I just want to make sure we're not setting up a strange financial risk for the folks that are going to be there, but you're comfortable that there is future documentation of that. It's not just being technically possible, it's also going to be financially viable in the long run of the upkeep and maintenance and so on of whatever that system ends up having to be.
And we are, I mean, we know there's risks, and that's why we are implementing the monitoring program, and we would like them to start kind of right away. Because that will tell long term, what's needed.
And then the impact to the amenities in Squamish is the sort of the comments back, I think, are accurate in so much as that most likely maths out. I haven't done that as far as the contributions of the folks that are going to be living there in future towards some facilities in Squamish. I do think that, and I also agree that a larger policy discussion here would be a good thing to take on. And this isn't the first conversation where this has been flagged as an issue. I'd welcome that work, but we don't have that. We don't have that. In the absence of that, I think it's important to understand that that there is an impact, there will be an impact to the amenities in Squamish. Also, the contributions from the future, we'll call them taxpayers there, are important and are substantial. However, when development occurs and we have a CAC policy inside the municipality, there is a CAC contribution in the creation of the new taxpayers that are also going to support that service. So I don't accept that argument that just creating more folks to pay into the fund is enough to offset the load that it will put onto our services. We heard earlier that we'll have about 2,800 population before the amenities start really being delivered there. So given the time frame of this, we've got a large number of years where there is an impact that's greater than zero, which is what's proposed to the municipality of Squamish. Now, this isn't about, this is really about offsetting. This conversation for me is about offsetting that impact. This isn't about trying to find a new funding model for pieces that we have going on in Squamish. But as it sits now, with that being silent on that piece, that's a deal breaker for me. Now, we don't have that larger policy, unfortunately, to deal with that, as we have these large developments in the regional district very close to municipalities. And I'd like to see that work happen. I'm not comfortable moving this forward without having a solution for this. So we either need to find a way and look at other precedents for how we find a number that's appropriate. But the number at zero at this point isn't supportable. So I would love to hear from the rest of the group how we deal with this. But this is a very important piece for me, and we're gonna need to find a way through here if this is gonna move forward with my vote.
Okay, we're still on questions. I have a question on the screen. Go ahead, Director Birch-Jones.
Thank you, Chair Ford. And I really appreciate the extra time staff took to put this report together. It answered, I feel, questions and concerns that were expressed well. I like how it's laid out. You have a typo on page 282 where it says restrictive instead of restrictive. Aside from that, I'm pretty comfortable. I'm happy to move this forward for second reading.
Okay, we're still on questions. We haven't got a motion on the floor. If you have a question, Director Pettengill, go ahead.
Yeah, just following up on one of Director Stoner's questions. And there's, the developer, if I understood correctly, is agreeable to establishing a tax service area for transit. But if there is a sale and that changes hands, is that a piece that can be secured or is secured? The willingness to petition, I guess.
Yes, through the chair, the petition requirement is set out in the development agreement that will run with the lands.
Okay. And then, just coming back to the issue about challenges with temporary use permits, and what I'm seeing in the area is a significant discomfort with work camps and then concern about impacts on rental markets and so on. Is now our only time to sort of put in conditions about, not having workers, sort of remote workers competing with rental housing in neighboring communities and that sort of things. And maybe, I guess, phasing the workforce housing earlier was one way to deal with that. But if we want to deal with that in some way, do we have to deal with it now, or do we have actual levers to sort of say, beyond denying a TUP, of saying, hey, we don't want live out allowances for workers to be in Squamish and Fray Creek for limited housing.
Through the chair,
Construction workers for clarity.
okay, so you're, just so I'm clear, you're concerned that construction workers who are hired to work on this project may take up housing in Squamish during the time that they're doing construction on this project?
Yes, if a temporary use permit is also not palatable, and again, just learning from what we're seeing in Squamish right now, and the conversations and concerns.
Through the chair, I'm not sure that we can force anyone to build workforce housing. I think it's a business decision, and if the construction teams realize that they have a problem in housing their workers, I suspect they may come in and apply for a TUP to house their workers on site. But yeah, I'm not sure that there's anything we can do in terms of housing competition.
So it's something that if we wanted to address it, we would sort of have to deal with it now in terms of timing or use of the affordable housing or that sort of thing. And we said, like, call it legacy housing is the terminology we're using in Squamish, but that would need to be built sort of now or conceived of earlier in the phase to offset some of these risk of some of these problems.
I don't know how to answer your question.
I think what he's asking for is a guarantee that we're going to put levers in at an OCP amendment that forces a business to make a business decision. That's outside of our jurisdiction. Am I correct?
No, I'm actually thinking like, well, it sounds like we don't have a lot of levers and so on. So if we wanted to sort of remove any risk, the requirement might be to make the workforce or the affordable housing, bring it into an earlier phase, and sort of as part of the agreements we're talking about now, require that to be used for construction worker housing. I think that was one of the things that was talked about. And that is something that we could theoretically, if everyone's agreeable, secure at this point. And if we didn't do that, then it would be left to maybe a TUP or something in the future.
Okay, you're the chair. At the time the housing agreement is prepared, the board could request that the affordable non-market housing be first utilized by construction workers and come over to the non-market sector, because most construction workers have a high enough wage that they would not qualify to live in non-market housing. But I think that this is something that the board in a few years' time may want to turn their minds to, working with the developer if that's something they think is important. But yes, the housing agreement, I should say, can be written such that there could be a temporary accommodation for workforce housing.
Okay, and then my last question, and I guess one of the things I'm struggling with is what we've meant by complete community in the RGS and OCP. And I guess my question is, has there been, and I know, you know, someone can't guarantee these are the businesses that'll be there and it's 100% guaranteed to work, but has there been something beyond just, you know, we've added commercial space, but this is the vision. These are the sorts of sectors that this is our vision, the sorts of sectors that are viable, and how the pay scale and the numbers of the amount of space aligns to the housing. So most of the people who work there can live there. Most of the people who live there can work there. And again, nothing can be guaranteed, but here's the sort of fairly clear, reasonable vision of how this fits together to make a complete community. Have we gotten that? Some of the discussions were before I was on the board full time.
So this is the neighborhood. This isn't a village and it's not a town, it's a neighborhood. When we did earlier studies of who would potentially live here, there was some thought that this actually may include a lot of remote workers who want to live there to be near amenities. So amenity migrants who can work from home. So there is going to be commercial, a significant amount of commercial here, but there's also going to be commercial uses at Britannia North and Britannia South. And I imagine, similar to what happens in the rest of the Sea to Sky corridor, people are migrating all over the place. People in Whistler are working in Squamish. People in Squamish are working in Vancouver. People in Vancouver are working in Squamish. People in Pemberton are working in Whistler, and on and on. And so I think we will probably see, in addition to what we envision being a large number for remote workers, I think there's going to be a lot of movement and a lot of fluidity. So nailing down a sort of a perfect marriage between the commercial and the housing, I'm not sure that we're ever going to get there in any of our communities.
Russell, question?
Excuse me. Yeah, the amenity funds stuff that Arm's talking about, do we not have staff working on that? Because nobody has proven one way or the other if people from the regional district are going to impact the municipalities or whatever. So I thought staff was working on that, trying to come up with like a percentage of usage and stuff, which then would in turn give a percentage of, how much money should be put forward. Because just to say that we want a certain amount of money without any justification, that's not right. So I think that staff needs to finish that program, and we don't want, at least I certainly don't want us to be holding up this project based on that. That's a different sort of scenario that started last year. And I think that we need staff from the regional district, Squamish, Whistler, Pemberton. We all need to figure that out, because all those municipalities have indicated they want to share in the elected area amenity funds. But until I would ever agree to that, I want to know what the actual impact is. Because just to say we want 50% or 90% of the amenity funds, what are you justifying that on? I want to know.
Okay.
I want to know what the numbers are.
We're going to come back to you with that answer
Okay.
at a future meeting. And I do have another question on the screen. Director Hoffel, go ahead.
Thank you. I actually don't have a question. I just have a comment. And that is, I realize that this project is at the early preliminary stages. And, typically when these projects go on, they do create a false housing market, a false rental market. So we have hydro coming in, a lot of hydro employees, and they're going to be here for over the next coming years when they're working on things like LaJoy Dam and other dams. And that, having them does have an impact on our community. Some of that impact is good, and some of that impact is where I believe that does create a false housing market. But we are in a place where we have a huge housing shortage. And if we never take on these big projects to create, this is going to create over 1,000 units. What's to say that people from Pemberton or Whistler or Squamish won't be moving down there? you know, and giving them a place to live too. So I just think that before, you know, we ixnay this, that the long-term thought is to create housing. I know it's hard getting there, and the steps in between can be really challenging, but that is the long-term goal in my eyes anyways. Thank you.
Director Hoppel. Director Crompton, do you have a question?
I do, thanks. If we gave it second reading and then this report was completed, could there be substantial changes made to the community amenity contribution agreement at third reading? Is that something we can do?
Director Nina?
Yes, through the chair, that would be at the board's discretion.
Yes, before third reading
Yes.
with a public hearing.
It wouldn't have to go back to public hearing?
I would say that if it were not a use or density issue, I don't see why it would have to go back. Unless it were something, I mean, as long as it were a community amenity contribution and not a taxation issue, I don't see why it would need to go back.
But it may come back, the report may come back and point to taxation?
Yes, I think the public would want to know if there was a request being made for further taxation.
Okay, and one other question. What's my other question? Sorry. Oh, I just want to confirm, is that true what Director Herford says, that there is no additional community amenity contribution being proposed that would directly be contributed to Squamish? It's just a matter of additional residents contributing through existing taxation.
I'm going to stop you there, Director Crompton. You're walking a fine line between open and closed.
Okay, I don't understand that. Can we go into close?
I think we have to. We have a resolution that we close this meeting to the public, please. Moved by Director Stoner, second by Director Herford. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Okay, I was opposed.